Well, shall we roll into this? Let me do my official Heather introduction. Heather Shumaker is one of my heroes. Her books, It's Okay Not to Share and It's Okay to Go Up the Slide, are, I think, indispensable reading for early learning professionals and parents of young children. I I broke Heather down years ago and just annoyed her enough until she agreed to do a podcast with me. And there's that's called the Renegade Rules podcast, and it's about 160 plus episodes of Heather and I talking about things like sharing and other things that Heather talks about in the books. She is delightful and very thoughtful about all the early learning topics that a lot of us kind of maybe sometimes don't even feel like talking about or don't feel comfortable talking about. Heather barrels into them head on and has very interesting and I think not only enjoyable but thoughtful takes on these things. And this one, sharing, is I think a huge issue for parents and early learning providers as well. And I'm just really excited to bring Heather here to discuss the topic with you. So Heather, any other amazing stuff you want to say about yourself? You're
We'll get into it.
I'll share links to Heather's books and website and things in the chat as we progress through the evening as well. So Heather, you want to just start rolling out the topic for us, and we'll just see where it goes.
Sure. Well, hello everyone, and my kids were so excited to know that it was tomorrow for you. They thought that was wonderful. So, but it's tonight for me. We're going to talk all about sharing, and we'll dive into it. And of course, we can have questions, as Jeff said, later on. So, if you got questions, share them, and save them up. I think sharing, at least in the U.S., but I found this pretty universal in Western culture, and is as soon as a child is old enough to walk, we expect them to share their toys, and we say things like "be nice and share." I've heard this to pre-verbal toddlers. They're about 18 months. That's about the age we start badgering them to start sharing. And this is something that's always bothered me because I grew up with a very different philosophy, both my parents' parenting style and the preschools and early learning that I went to. So that's why I ended up writing a book called It's Okay Not to Share, which makes everybody think I'm mean. But we'll get into why I think it actually produces humans who are a little more kind and respectful and aware of the people around them. And plus, the traditional way that I see adults interacting with kids, trying to get them to share, really backfires and delays things. So this is what I see. It's a universal conflict. Two young kids want the same thing at the same time. And that's when we swoop in and say, be nice and share. Or sometimes people set timers and say, you've had it a long time. Now it's Joey's turn. So in 5 minutes, when the timer goes off, you have to give it over to the next kid. And that's what I call forced sharing, where the adult decrees from on high that your time's up. It's time to give up whatever you're doing and give it away to somebody else who is demanding it. And this feels terrible. I have had adult women, particularly women, come up to me. Some of them are 70 years old in audiences where I speak, and they'll say to me, I am still mad at my sister all those years ago for having to share toys back when we were little kids, because it was forced on them. And when we give up something, it tends to feel terrible inside. And that's the exact opposite feeling that we really want to encourage for young kids, to realize that, when I really want to give, it feels wonderful inside. So kids will only share if they're sort of taught to do forced sharing if somebody's watching. If we're watching, or an adult is even just standing there, or if we make them, they're going to share. But if they're used to forced sharing, they often won't do it at all if an adult isn't watching. So there's what I call renegade sharing, and we'll get into that. Kids will do it because they want to and because it feels good. They'll do it on their own, which I think is actually the true beginnings of generosity and that moral development. Do you want me to just keep on going, or are we having a conversation, Jeff?
Well, I just love listening to you talk so much. Sometimes I don't know when to jump in.
I think
So you're right. I remember, I mean, I was the oldest child in our family, and I had sharing stuff all the time. I don't think I ever got to have anything on my own because there was always somebody littler that I had to be nice to. And I'm still kind of torqued off about it sometimes. And in early learning settings, it's kind of the same situation multiplied, because you don't have the deep relationships with the kids, and it's like everybody's watching you. So you want everybody to share so the other parents are happy. And so your coworkers think everything is running smoothly. And it sets up a dynamic that is almost unmanageable and unrealistic when we want that sharing because I said so going on all the time.
well, something that you said at the beginning really speaks to it. Is you said, I felt like I never had ownership of anything.
Hmm.
Well, that's really the fundamental thing for a child, and really for all ages. We can't share unless we feel that we own it. And I don't mean personal property rights in a legal sense. I mean that we have control of it. So if there's a ball or a stick, it can be a leaf. It doesn't have to be a fancy toy. If the child feels that they have control of that stick, then they own it. They are in control of it. They can decide to put it down. They can decide to pick it up. They can decide to play with it. They can decide to give it to somebody. But if they don't feel that they have that choice and that ownership, then how can they give something away? So you have to allow the kid a chance to feel ownership in the first place before they can um, actually share on their own that way. So let me just describe what I call renegade turn taking, or renegade sharing, which is instead of the adult swooping in and saying, your time's up, I'm going to create some arbitrary number. I mean, what young child understands what 5 minutes is? That just means I better hurry up because that adult is mad at me and I have to, interrupt what I'm doing and get on with it. Just they don't really know if 5 minutes is 5 seconds or 5 hours. So time is vague. It really doesn't work that way. But instead of forcing the sharing, if instead you just wait, it's very simple. Just say, you can have it till you're done. And when you're done, Joey's waiting, or whoever it is waiting. And if a child is not used to this, they will look at you and they'll test you, because they're going to test you till they trust you. So this could be, if you say you can play with it till you're done, you have to have very strong willpower if this is a new concept for you, because they are going to, maybe, how long would that be? I have seen a kid, when they've been told you can play with it until you're finished, drop it 5 seconds later. It could be an hour later. It could be 7 hours later. It could be a week later. Right? Time is very fluid for young children. They are done with it when they're done with the play that they're actively doing. So time really has no barriers and boundaries to them. So you have to be strong. When I was introducing this idea to a family, she said, okay, I read Heather's book. I'm going to do this. It sounds great. I'll wait till the child's all done. She has 3 little girls, and she had them in the back seat of the car, and they were driving somewhere. And she said, all right, she'd always done forced sharing. She said, all right, you can have that. I think it was a book that they all wanted to look at. You can have it until you're done. There was stunned silence in the back seat, because this was not what their mom usually said. She gave them no warning. So the child who had it continued. And then about 15 seconds later, the mom could not take it anymore. And she said, that's it, give it to your sister, right? So you have to be prepared that you might feel, this is going on too long for me, I can't stand it anymore, and still be strong. Because if you've said you can have it till you're done, you better mean it, because they're going to keep testing that. Now, usually a child who has been forced to share in the past will be the one that takes the longest turns, because they're testing you, and they've never been used to, like, Jeff here as a kid never had a chance to own something and decide when to be done with it. So they're gonna, with you, if you make this boundary, they're gonna stretch it out to the limit, especially at first, until they feel that they can trust this. Then the turns magically get shorter and shorter because they're no longer just trying to keep looking to see if you're watching, and it's not all about control anymore. It's more about, I'm comfortable here. I know that I can trust these people. I can play and then I can put it down and then I can go on to the next thing and it's okay. So what happens when you wait for a child to be done? They have you seen a kid just playing with a toy? I'm just gonna use a pen here. I don't have any fancy toy. But when they're done, they just drop it and they just turn their backs and walk away, right? When they're done, they're done. And it's at that moment, if you're observing, that you can say, oh, remember Joey wanted that. And then since they're finished with it, they're happy to pick up that really exciting black pen and rush over to the child who's been waiting, because then they want to give it then. They're wanting to please. And at that moment, there's this internal rush of happiness and goodwill and, oh, I can make somebody happy. And it just feels good. Your whole body is flooded with this good feeling. And that, if we say that's what sharing is, our brains are wired to repeat those good feelings. So the child who is encouraged to share at the moment they're finished, oh, remember so-and-so is waiting, and they rush up to give it to them, that's reinforced that, oh, that felt good. So they're not just their conscious mind, but their unconscious chemical mind will remember that for next time and associate sharing with good rather than sharing as something bad. People are taking things away from me. But I think that the child who's waiting learns just as much, if not more, than the child who's giving or holding on to things. So there's so much, to me, I love the sharing conflict. One, because it happens all the time, all over the world. And two, because there's so much good social and emotional learning that can happen in these opportunities. So for the kid who's waiting, instead of saying, he's not sharing, and do that little whiny voice, they know how to push our buttons. So instead, he's not sharing, instead of manipulating us and getting their demands instantly gratified just by invoking the sharing word, instead, that child has to wait, which is really hard to wait. And that involves developing impulse control, which is difficult and takes practice and time. And it takes emotional learning. So that child is probably going to be mad, they're going to be jealous, they're going to be sad, they didn't get the truck they wanted, they're going to be frustrated. And all those big emotions can come out. They may come out, they're trying to, hit the other kid or grab the toy. But we as the adult have to stop that from happening and just say, no, Sarah's still busy using it. You can have it when she's done, but she's still busy. I'm going to protect her right to do that. But then help that child with those big emotions, because that's I think that's another topic we're doing, I think next month, is big emotions. Yeah. But really they're all intertwined. So every chance we get to help a child with difficult emotions, especially the anger and sorrow and all those things, or even fear, I'm afraid I'll never get to play with that toy. Every chance we get to help that child practice those difficult feelings is tremendous. It's a great opportunity for us, and it's such a huge opportunity for the child to grow.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So a couple things. One, when I touch on this topic in some of the sessions I like to talk about the relationship that adults have with sharing and what their expectations of kids, because most adults won't and can't share to the level that they often expect 2 and 3-year-olds to. I'll ask somebody to unlock their phone and share it with me, and that very rarely happens. And so I was wondering if you could touch on that, and then also, this sounds like a challenge if you're a parent with a couple kids of your own. How do you do this in a classroom of half a dozen or 8 or 10 3-year-olds? How do you, if you're used to doing sharing the way most people do sharing, how do you implement the renegade process in a bigger setting like that?
Right. So I think people have access to the chat. Is that right?
Yep.
So if you want to put something in the chat right now, one question I have for you all is, what elements have to be in place for you as an adult before you're willing to share something? Right? So type in something that, if your friend or your family member or somebody asks to borrow something that you value, maybe it doesn't have to be money, but something that something of yours, what has to be in place before you as an adult are ready? Trust. What else?
I, I mean, I think there needs to be some sort of relationship there. Maybe that's where the trust grows from. But I have, it's easier to share with somebody I know and have some experience with than a stranger on the street.
Trust that somebody will take care of it. That's a big one. And trust is such a huge word, because I think it looks like, Nicole, you wrote in, trust that they'll take care of it. So if I lend a book to my friend, I don't want it back dog-eared. I don't mind if they buy it themselves and dog-ear it and underline it. But if it's my book, no, it's got to come back pristine. And there's some people I will not lend my paperbacks to. Like, no, you have proved that you cannot take care of a book. You poured your iced tea all over it. No. And for a child, that would be, am I going to get it back the same condition it was? Am I going to get it back soon? Do I know you? That's what I think, Jeff, you were getting at. There's some relationship. Is it something that's so valuable to me that I just won't lend it out? Or personal. So the phone, maybe your lipstick, your car keys, your journal that you put all your innermost thoughts, your husband or wife. I mean, there's things we don't lend out, right? It's the same for kids. We don't, a favorite blankie is off limits.
Yeah.
All right. But you can also tell kids, look, this is someone's favorite teddy from home, the one they sleep with. It got mixed up with the school toys. But no, this is, so-and-so's favorite teddy from home. Okay, everybody gets that. 3-year-olds understand that is off limits. So there can be some things that are just so valuable and so personal. They are not, they cannot even go in the laundry to be washed. Right? But then you are also getting into the group situation. This works great. This idea of waiting till someone is done works really well in a group setting. So I don't know if anybody works with children as young as sort of 2 and younger ones, or whether you're working with the older okay, there's some people with the little ones. When you're working with the really little ones, it can help, as you probably know, to have multiples of some favorite toys, right? Because there's a lot of parallel play going on, and that can be a way that kids interact by being near, but not having to wait. The 1-year-olds, 1.5-year-olds, 2-year-olds, their ability to wait is going to be a lot smaller than, say, a 3-year-old, a 4.5-year-old, and 5-year-old, and so on. But you don't have to. If everybody wants to swing on the swings, or everybody wants to play with the blue truck, then you don't have to have 10 blue trucks or 25 blue trucks or swings for everybody. You might have a couple of them, but you're not going to have enough for everybody. And that's absolutely fine. You can still have long turns. In fact, one thing that's really useful in a group setting is a waiting list. So I'm not, as you get to know me better, you'll know I'm not a big proponent of early reading and writing unless the kid wants to do that on their own. But if you write a waiting list with the name of the children who want a turn on the swing, you can write, Joey, Roxy, Olivia, whoever they are. And they might not even recognize the first letter of their name, but they hear you and they see visually that something is going on that list. They're beginning, this is a math skill. I mean, this is a literacy skill, but it's mostly an emotional and a social skill. They're learning sequence. First comes Jack, then comes Noah, then comes Roxy, and they're learning the order. They have it memorized because it's important to them, right? I want this swing, so they're really going to pay attention. And then you cross off each one. I've seen 4-year-olds who, if there's a group item that's really popular and somebody's playing with it for an hour and doesn't get off until they're really done, I've seen 4-year-olds say, hey, let's make a waiting list. Right? They've been introduced to the tool by the adults. They've learned to trust that, yes, this really works, that our rights will be upheld. And so the kids themselves, they don't even run to the teacher. At age 4, if they're used to this kind of respectful turn taking, they will grab a marker and a piece of paper by themselves and say, hey, let's make a waiting list. And they might write it in absolutely unintelligible letters. It might look like scribbles. There may be no letters at all, but you will be guaranteed that they know which blob is which kid. And they will have it memorized. And then they'll come get each other when it's their turn. And what's nice with the waiting list is a child who's waiting for the swing, for example, can go off and play with something else and not even worry. They won't keep looking over their shoulder. Oh, are they done? They can get involved in something else because they have that respect and trust that someone will come get them and tell them it's their turn, and that nobody else is going to get on that swing until they've either said, you know what, I changed my mind, or yes, it's my turn. So that works well in group settings.
Yeah, and it takes a while to get there. I mean, you've got to work through that. This is brand new, and we don't know how to do this yet before you get to that point where everybody's comfortable with it. And like you say, that transition can be really uncomfortable for the kids and the teachers while everybody's testing everybody. I think another problem that group settings have compared to families is that if not everybody is on the same page staff wise, it's just going to make it incredibly difficult. So there might be somebody at the session tonight thinking, oh, I'm going to give this a try. But if the 3 people you work with aren't on board, it's probably going to be a struggle to make it work.
Yeah. Then you have uneven levels of trust. It's like living in a country where all different, the prime minister and the president and everybody's telling you to do different things. It just doesn't work. You're driving on the left, you're driving on the right. No, you've got to, for this to work, you do have to have cohesive community among the adults, or it's going to fall to pieces really fast because you won't build that trust. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, and I'll get into more of the benefits for the kids also, you need to have a talk with your co-teacher or your director and spend as long as you need thinking through these issues on your own, because you do need to have a cohesive front. Otherwise it'll backfire. So another thing, I just wanted to share some of the benefits. We talked about some of the benefits that the waiting child has, but think about the benefits that the playing child has. So if you're in the middle of something, I can see some of you. Jeff is using his microphone. He's busy using it right now. If I were to say, you've had that for a number of minutes, you're done. I'm going to snatch it away from you. Luckily, he's safe because I can't reach it. I'm going to snatch that away from you. You've had enough time with it. I think that's enough time. You're done. He's being interrupted. He's busy using something. He's interested in it. It's like a child playing. We don't want to interrupt the great learning that's going on with a child involved in play. If they're using that one shovel that's in the, in the sand area, and they're doing a lot of digging and they're not done, we are interrupting them by saying they have to be done now. But we're also telling them, you don't really count. And when we say you can decide yourself when you're finished, then they're learning to stand up for themselves. And this, I think, is enormous. They're also learning to set a limit. So conflict mediation, any kind of conflict between kids, not only is there the learning to control your emotions part, but there's the learning to set a limit on another human being and stand up for yourself. That is something particularly the girls get of be nice, you know. Uh,
Heather,
yeah,
excuse me, a couple weeks ago we had Mike Huber on and we were talking about consent and learning consent and rough and tumble play. And I think this bit of sharing, I think there's a lot of consent involved in that too,
yeah,
and opportunities to learn not only to, well, I mean, to learn to respect consent and learn people's respect people's choices not to consent to give me
right.
that shovel or whatever it is.
Right. I mean, this is something I think we've overlooked for generations, but we teach children to um, give in, and particularly, at least historically, generationally, we've put that pressure on the girls.
Yep.
So then you end up with adults who don't know how to set limits, don't know how to set personal limits. When we don't like something, we just kind of cringe inside, but we don't say, hey, I didn't like that, and say specifically what you didn't like. Because just like any other conflict with sharing, you could say, hey, I didn't like that you took those blocks. I'm not done with them yet. And standing up for yourself. For those working with the little ones, that they can't verbalize all this, right? But the little ones, they can learn to take a stance and put their hand out. You can model that, and you can say the words, I'm not done, and then tell them, you can have as long a turn, you can keep playing until you're done. But they can start to do the standing up for themselves without even speaking. There's some boys that are going to take longer to be verbal, and of course the smaller, younger children are going to need to do it with a physical motion rather than with the words at first, as they learn to do this. uh, but standing up for yourself, this is a concept a lot of the kids don't get. They think they have to completely obey all tall people. They also don't realize that they know that adults can set limits on them. They don't know that they can set limits themselves. This gets into all kinds of personal safety things too, but a child can decide if they want somebody to touch their body. Now, if they're hitting somebody and you need to stop the hitting, there's times when we do need to move them or constrain them. But if it's just a play situation and they don't want somebody near them or touching them, they have the right to set a limit on a bigger person. And it's a radical idea for the kids to think that they can set a limit on another child. They think that just the teacher people, the parent people, the adult people are the ones who are allowed to do that. But they can set a limit on another short person, on another 4-year-old, on another 3-year-old. And this is a radical idea for these kids. And it's so essential because it gets us out of the referee job. We don't want to be the judge and the referee all day long. This is exhausting. I think, Jeff, you do workshops on burnout.
Yeah.
Well, if you just get rid of this one conflict, sharing conflicts, it's not going to go away entirely. But if you have a system where kids know that they can play with it as long as until they're finished, or they could start a waiting list, or they have these tools at their disposal, that makes your job easier. It makes them happier. It makes you happier. It might be a little rough at the beginning if they're testing you with long turns, or if they have to have a lot of squalling and squeaking and kicking because they're not used to waiting for anything. But as they get used to that, your job gets a lot easier, and you can focus on other things. You can develop your relationship with them differently rather than always, always, always trying to be the referee and the perfect judge. Because you know the reality, you do not see everything that happens, but you think, oh my gosh, I need to know, who had it first, and is this the right thing, and what decisions should I make? It's not really that essential. You just need to help them verbalize it themselves. So you can ask a child, were you finished with that? Were you still playing with that? Oh, Jenny was still playing with that toy. And so then it doesn't matter who did what, really. You just check in with the kid who had it. But I think standing up for yourself is a hugely overlooked skill that takes enormous practice, especially for some personalities, and almost universally for young children, because they have no idea they can do it. But if you think about the Me Too movement, which is now a global catchphrase, These are the same exact skills that we need to practice, even if it's about a blue truck when you're 3. It can be about other things, bigger conflicts when you're older. So learning how to stick up for yourself is not just something nice to talk about. It's something can be essential to survival. Got you silent on that one, didn't I?
So, Heather, how do you, if you decide you're going to try this in an early learning setting, how do you get parents on board? Do you need to, I mean, we talked about a minute ago about staff cohesiveness and having everybody on board. Do you need to sit all the parents down with a cocktail and have a discussion about this as well? Or how do you, what are your
Uh,
tips?
Cocktails are optional. No, look, children are much smarter than we give them credit for. Although, since all of you work with young children, probably you know more better than many people how smart they are. One of the fundamental things that young children understand is that different rules apply in different places, right? They go to grandmother's house and the rules are different. They go to their neighbor's house and you have to take your shoes off before you enter the house. You go to this house, things are different with different people. And even, let's say they have a 2-parent family, they know that dad plays differently than mom plays. So kids are used to things being different with different people and different rules. I think in a caregiving setting, in a school, preschool setting, it's very helpful to have a cohesive philosophy among the caregivers. But if it's different when they go home, they can cope with that because they know that they at least have one safe place to play. They have one safe place to control that toy. They have one safe place where they can be mad and they won't get in trouble just for being angry. So it would be ideal to have that same cohesion between the home and the school, but it may take some time. I certainly find that people are where they are and you can't hurry them along, but you can encourage them. And a lot of times people are like, my own mother, she taught at a preschool for 40 years. But before she did that, she was well-meaning but clueless. She was one of the many new parents in the world who wanted to do a good job, but really didn't know that much about child development, didn't know what was appropriate. So they will be looking to you, most of them, for some guidance, and you can act as a mentor. Um, Sharing books like It's Okay Not to Share, to let maybe you have a lending copy that can go home with the families, or you have a little library, or some places have book clubs where they talk about it, or they suggest to the parents, why don't you listen to this podcast? You can bring them along the journey, especially if they're willing. I don't think you can force them along the journey, but there's a lot. You can also have, I don't know if this is mostly home caregiving in your home or whether it's more child centers, but especially with a center or a preschool, you can have parent education nights. You can play out sharing conflicts in a skit. You can have puppet shows. I mean, you can do the works to educate the parents because the children will get it really fast. They may test a little bit, but they understand the concept. It's so simple. Play with it till you're finished. That's it. There's no fancy rules. The parents can take a while to unlearn what they've thought they knew. So it can take longer to teach the parents than it can to teach a 2-year-old.
Yeah, and I think, success, things that work are kind of contagious in those kind of settings. So when parents are dropping kids off and picking them up and they see this new thing where people aren't fighting over the green shovel, and they're probably going to be questions asked about what's going on different here and how's this work, and they're going to want to recreate that success at home in a
Right.
lot of
And it
situations.
is quite simple to do at home. I know a mother who said, well, I'm going to try it. And of course, she had a larger sense of impulse control than the other mother I was telling you about. But she tried it and she said within 24 hours, it had transformed her home. It was simple. Both her kids got it. She had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they both got it right away. And she didn't have to be referee anymore. And she was so relieved. So it can, if you're on board, it can be quite a simple process to get in home. And this book, It's Okay Not to Share, has, I think, 29 of these topics in the book, each chapter. And sharing is basically one of them. And if you're feeling overwhelmed of, well, where should I start? What should I do first? I always recommend people start with sharing, because it's such, it happens all the time, these sharing conflicts, but it's such a simple fix. It's one thing. And so, yeah, it's a good first step. And then some of the other things, like getting into rough and tumble, can be a lot harder for a lot of for a lot of adults.
Yeah, yeah, but having success with the sharing kind of opens people up to taking on some of those other challenges.
Yeah. So do we want to take, I know that everyone needs to be on mute, but do you want to take questions by chat, or how do you like to run this?
Well, we do whatever people are comfortable doing. Anybody want to unmute themselves if you have questions or comments, or what do we want to do? Nicole, you there?
I'll unmute because I've got a question. So this is a personal question, but with my two daughters, they share a bedroom and they have to share a bedroom. We don't have another option for them unless one of them wants to sleep outside. So they have to share a bedroom. And if one is in there playing and she wants to play on her own, it's very difficult to say to the other one, well, you can't be in here because she wants to play on her own when they share that space. What's the best way of kind of navigating that situation where you can see they need their own, it's that right to play on your own and to have your own things and to do your own things, and yet everything for them is kind of forced shared by necessity.
Right. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not just sharing a toy. Sharing is also sharing people and sharing spaces, right? And sometimes I like to start with the object, because that's just easy to think about. In your home or in your center, you have to think about what spaces can be private and what spaces are public. So for example, in our house, anybody can be in our living room. If you don't want to hear your brother sing, or you don't want to, whatever it is, you have the right to leave, but he has the right to be there. It's a public space. So you have to decide what places and spaces are okay for anybody. And are there places, because everybody needs to get away from other people once in a while, right? We do too. What places can be private? So with a shared bedroom, maybe it's not the bedroom itself that they need, but they need to have some private space. Can you find a place that they can each have a cubby area? We use card tables, those foldable tables, and you can put a blanket over it, and then they got their own little house. At my mother's preschool, they have little tents or little things you can set up that create a space, or the kids can take a blanket and make a little spot, or maybe there's a part of your furniture that naturally makes a little spot. If they need their private space, I'm sure you can find a way to give them that space. It may not be the bedroom. Maybe in your house you decide it is. Maybe that is an option. Some people I know that share a bedroom, they put a thing of tape down the middle. And I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do it. Sometimes the children themselves, I don't know what age we're talking about, but they can come up with their own ideas of how to share it. You say, I've noticed that, Sarah wants to be in the bedroom by herself, and I noticed that you also want to be there by yourself. What can we do? And ask them, because they may actually come up with such a creative idea to solve this conflict that you never would have thought of, and it may work for them. And even if it doesn't work for them, I would try their idea first and say, oh gosh, this isn't working. What can we do next? So you can problem solve that way. But it's okay to create a private space. And then you may have to decide that the climber outside is public. You can't own the climber. But maybe the space under the climber, that little cubby spot, is something that somebody can claim and put up a sign and say, Ben lives here, and maybe he lives there for that afternoon. Then it comes down when he doesn't need to live there anymore. So that's part of it. Did you have a second part to that question that I didn't get to? Sorry.
No, I don't think so. I think that pretty much covered it.
Oh,
thank you. They're 5 and 7, so 5 and 7-year-old girls, and yeah.
Nicole, one of them needs to go live in the caravan.
Well, that's always an option, actually. Maybe that is the option. We move someone down to the caravan.
Yeah, you can abandon
Parent.
Yeah, maybe it'll be me.
So
I'll move.
I also, based on Nicole's comment, we also need to think about sharing people, because a child has a right, if it's possible, if you're all cramped together and you can't get away, but if it's playtime and it's possible, and a child wants to play by herself, she has a right not to be around other people to the extent that you can manage it. You still need to kind of watch out for them, but sharing people means I get to play just with Nicole right now, right? I don't feel like playing with Jeff, or developmentally, I can't cope with a third person, right? So it's not the idea of taking turns. It's not personal. I want to play with the blue truck, not the red truck. I want to play with Nicole right now. When I'm not busy playing with Nicole, I want to play with Jeff. Or maybe right now, Nicole and I are having a good game together and I don't want to interrupt that dynamic. But in a little while, we could expand the game and bring in some other people. People have trouble with this because we feel it's mean, or it could lead to all kinds of excluding behaviors. But is it any different than if, okay, this is a pre-coronavirus example, but let's pretend that you're out at a coffee shop having a nice chat with your best friend, and your husband or partner stops by and says, hey, well, that just, if he pulls up a chair and sits down, that totally changes the dynamic. It's not that you don't like him. It's not even that you don't love him, hopefully, or you wouldn't be in this partnership. But you don't want him right now because it's interrupting your play, your moment with your best friend there. So it's not mean to say, hey, see you later. It's not exclusionary, except what it is, it's protecting a relationship. It's protecting a chance to be one-on-one with somebody. And a lot of times young children cannot articulate that. And yet it's a very deep need. So sometimes they'll show with their body language. Sometimes they might say with their words, and you can help them say it in a way that's a bit more respectful, such as, I don't want to play with you. You might want to say, can we say, I don't want to play with you right now because I'm busy doing this. So that's a whole different workshop called exclusionary play. And it's controversial, and you don't have to swallow it hook, line, and sinker just because I brought it up. But it is an aspect of sharing that most people overlook. So Nicole, when you brought up she wants to play by herself, to me, that is a right that I would protect, that child has a right to be by herself and play her own game with nobody bugging her, if it's possible, given, the housing situation. And there's also times to just play with one other child. And if you have siblings at home, they sometimes need a break from each other. One thing that we found useful with siblings, or even with kids in a center, is to make a date. It's not like, let's go out to the pub tonight. It's, I will play with you after lunch. So it's not in 5 minutes. They can't cope with that. But give a marker to the day. I'll play with you after nap time, or I'll play with you after supper, whatever the marker of their day is. Because chances are, if you're siblings or you're in the same preschool together, you're going to want to play with that kid at some point, but just maybe not this moment. So don't make it a big deal.
I found that really interesting, and I'm going to bring up something that I think Jeff normally brings up, because Jeff says it all the time, about what Dan Hodgins says about not making moral issues out of developmental ones. That's completely what came to me when you said that about children excluding others, or not wanting, I don't want to play with that person, I just want to play with this person. And I think you see that all the time in early childhood services, where it's like, well, I want to play with this friend, but not that friend. And I think as the adults, we take this big, oh my gosh, it means that this child's getting left out and now they're hurting their feelings. And, it turns into this really big thing when it's actually really developmentally appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. And, you use the term friend, which is a word that I think is a very specific word. Many adults in the US certainly will call anybody who's short, any child, friend. All my friends come to the rug. Share with your friend to a child they just met 5 seconds ago at the playground.
Not all friends.
They're not friends. They don't maybe even know each other. A lot of them are so wrapped up in their own world, they don't even know the kid's name. They don't know if that kid bites or they're the kind that kicks. They don't know much about them. They don't know whether they should feel safe. So a friend, many, many young children are only encountering their very first friends in the true sense of the word around age 3 or 4. They've been doing parallel play. Maybe they've been stuck together with young children that their fathers and mothers are friends with, the parents, and they have to be with these other kids, but they're not friends. They're just all the same age. So a friend is a very unique person, and I think we cheapen the word when we use it too much, just to describe another young child. They do not have to like each other. I don't have to like any of you. For one thing, I don't know you guys. We're just beginning to get to know each other. But we don't have to like each other, but we have to respect each other. That means listening to somebody else's limits, listening to what they have to say. And with the children, they often don't like each other. There's all kinds of personalities in there, and some of them can't control their bodies very well. And so they don't have to like each other. They have to coexist, and they have to respect each other, that they're not going to rip up their picture they just drew or stamp all over their block tower. There's limits. So they have to treat each other decently, but they don't have to like each other, and they don't have to be friends.
So we're supposed to be done right now. Heather has generously said she'd hang around for a little while if we go over. I understand some of you might have to get to the classroom and those kind of things. I put a link in the chat for the evaluation. If you want a certificate, you can fill that out and submit it, and it'll generate a certificate for you. Heather, there's one other question here in the chat. Did you see that, or you want me to read it?
Well, why don't you read it aloud so everyone hears it? It's about puzzles.
Yeah, in my room at my center, we have a puzzle area this includes a puzzle table. We often have children bringing their puzzle onto the table, which can get quite cluttered when there's a few of them eager to do puzzles. How can I manage this space, give them allocated time at the table?
Well, my first impulse for all things is to ask the kids what they think. So for example, in my childhood preschool, there's an indoor slide because there's a big room that's just for running and screaming and big body motion. And in that room, they had an indoor slide. And there was some trouble with kids wanting to do different play ideas on the slide. And they said, well, there seems to be a problem. Some kids are mad about this. Some kids are worried about this. And the kids came up with their own idea of how to solve that problem. So I don't know if the kids themselves are concerned about the puzzle or if it's more of the adults worried that the puzzle pieces are going to get mixed up between the puzzles. In general, I like to not have any limits on like only 3 people at the water table, or only 2 people can paint at one time. That doesn't make any sense to me, because it's a way of separating social interaction, avoiding conflict, and not giving the kids the chance to practice conflict skills. Because we can sing songs about peace all we like. It's not going to happen until children have a chance to practice their peace skills, which is encountering conflict. The more they can encounter conflict, the better they will get at managing conflict with your expert guidance. So managing those big emotions, managing how to get out of a conflict situation, problem solving, all those things. So a puzzle, maybe they have ideas of how to solve. Is there a problem? Is it your problem? What's the problem? Can you define it? Whose problem is it? And can you define the problem? And maybe they have ideas, or maybe puzzles are so popular at your center that you need more tables, or you need to have some space on the floor that you do it. So I think you'll figure it out just like any conflict, but I am in favor of the not artificially limiting the number of people at a certain area. Does anybody want to chime in with a good idea that's worked for you with that kind of situation?
I mean, when we had everybody wanting to do the same thing, we just made more room for the thing. Like you said, I mean, somebody might be doing their puzzle on one side of the table, and you maybe got room for two puzzle doers on one table. But then you've got somebody under the table, and you've got somebody sitting next to them on the floor by the table, and maybe somebody's taking a puzzle outside when their group goes outside, because the puzzles can go outside once in a while too. So I think we make space, and then we work on sharing that space as best we can with our floppy, uncontrollable 3-year-old bodies.
Any other burning questions?
Not so much burning, but again, I think it reflects back to the staff you're working with, and some people's ideas not being, but they just won't change the way they think, and you get very strong personalities that will take over the whole, and again, it's that conflict of, can I manage this conflict with that person? Because, that type of thing. Again, it's all the personalities, and the stronger one often wins. And, well, we're not allowed to have puzzles on the floor. That's not how we do it here, or we're not allowed to let the child use water. They'll make a mess. Well, they're exploring, So in other times I've had that, whereas now I really like the job I'm doing because I'm going out to the homes and I have a lot more variety. I can sort of decide where the play goes a bit more and help the child. Well, let the child decide. That's what we do. We sort of let the child, we provide things and they just do what they want. And we show the parent how they can learn through everyday experiences. But yeah, like I said, it's just tricky because I know I worked in preschools and yeah, it was very hard. Anyway.
It helps so much in a center to have leadership that embraces all the staff and brings you along together. And if you don't have that, you got to go back to the beginning if you can, or get another job that can embrace you, because that's just a recipe for disaster, burnout, and it doesn't help the kids either.
Good. Yeah.
And it seems that the people that are really locked into their positions on things and their way of doing things don't show up for trainings like this one. So
that way, yeah.
That's a bit of a challenge as well. Any final questions for Heather before we wrap this one up?
Yeah, so really on sharing, it's a simple one. It can transform life, but it has all the elements of peace skills, conflict mediation, standing up for yourself, dealing with your emotions, and making the adult's life easier, while giving the children the skills, the real life skills that early childhood is all about. So it's one of my favorite topics, and I hope some of it might sound familiar to you, and if not, I hope you talk to your fellow adults and give it a try. Just be prepared that the turns might be 8 days long.
8 days?
8 days, 8 weeks. Hey, Heather, thank you so much. We've got 2 more sessions on the calendar with Heather coming up. If you want her contact information, I put all of her links in the chat. I'm going to leave that on there. I'm not going to shut off right away, so anybody needs to scroll through and grab that information, you can do that. And enjoy your day. Thank you.
All right. Bye. So nice everybody. To see you all.
Got to wave like the end of the Beverly Hillbillies.
Thank you.